Today, we will visit Dallas, a modern city with a cosmopolitan spirit and southern charm. It is widely known for its skyscrapers, upscale shopping, restaurants, and rich cultural life. There are many historic districts, such as the West End with its late 19th century buildings and futuristic landmarks, shimmering glass towers and skyscraper spires that serve as the city's main landmarks. Dallas is a city where modern metropolitan life is infused with natural beauty. There are more than 30 parks in different parts of the city. The Gable Park residential complex is located at the epicenter of Dallas chic. Living here itself offers a vibrant, exclusive lifestyle and exquisite, unique experiences. The high-rise building is elegant in appearance, has a parking garage and concierge. It is a vibrant and luxurious apartment building with a landscaped saltwater pool, fitness studio, and gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas. It's a quiet and safe place with no crowds of tourists or neighborhood residents strolling by. On September 2, 2015, at 07:42 p.m., a car entered the Gable Park parking lot. The car parked, and a beautiful young woman got out. She had a shopping bag in her hands. She slammed the door shut, stepped away from the car, and a minute later, 2 gunshots rang out. With the business completed, the dark figure quickly jumped into a black Jeep Cherokee that pulled up and fled the apartment complex. Local resident Hashem Saad, who was walking to the parking lot to pick up his car, saw the injured woman and called the emergency services. Officers arrived at the scene of the tragedy and found the injured woman. Unfortunately, she was already dead. The victim turned out to be 35-year-old Kendra Hatcher. Kendra K. Hatcher was born February 3, 1980 to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois. Her parents divorced and her mother married Bruce Jamieson. She was not an only child. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Kaufman, Ashley Lipscomb, Melissa Jameson, and 1 brother, Neil Hatcher. She grew up in Pleasant Plains and studied dentistry there. After her divorce in 2010, she moved to Dallas, where she began working at Smile Zona Dental Studio. Kendra had a strong Christy and faith and wanted to use her dental skills to help others. For example, the clinic provided services to disadvantaged children completely free of charge. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible studies and participated in volunteer programs that included building churches overseas and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. Dallas was welcoming to the young professional. Kendra's professional life quickly gained momentum and her personal life flourished as well. On May 24, 2015, Kendra began dating Dr. Ricardo Paniagua. Kendra and Ricardo met through a dating app, and from their first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values, interests, and wanted the same things in life. Ricardo was finishing his residency in dermatology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, and even though they had only been in a relationship for a few months, the young men were already discussing their upcoming marriage. However, an incident in a parking lot took the life of his beloved woman and cut short all future plans. Investigators who arrived at the scene of the massacre examined the crime scene and put forward the version of robbery, as Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. Bullet fragments and a gun magazine were found on the ground next to her body. However, the manner of shooting and the traces of the gunshot pushed the robbery version to the background. 1 bullet struck the woman in the back and the other in the head. The entry wound from the bullet was at the top of the head and it exited through the chin, indicating that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was confirmed when it was possible to obtain CCTV footage and reconstruct a picture of what happened. The footage shows a black Jeep Grand Cherokee pulling into the parking lot at 07:15 p.m. Half an hour later, Kendra returns home and drives into the same garage. A few minutes later, a man approaches her, shoots her, and runs to the side, after which he jumps in and black Jeep on the move. The videos were of poor quality and the crime scene itself was not visible on them. It was impossible to identify the assailants, but the vehicle was put on a wanted list. It was decided to place the camera footage, images of the Jeep and the driver in the media. The authorities appealed to the public for help, and it helped. Police were contacted by a man named Jose Luis Ortiz. He reported that the car in the footage belonged to him. But Jose wasn't involved in the shooting and he wasn't driving it. When questioned, Jose explained that on the morning of September 2nd, he was approached by two of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez. They asked Jose to repair their car and, in return, to lend them his Jeep until the evening. The man agreed. He also said that later that evening, Brenda called Jose to a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Crystal Cortez, later that evening, drove the Jeep to Jose's house, so the man was quite surprised when his Jeep made the news. When Jose saw his Jeep on the TV program, he asked Brenda about it. She first said that it was a different Jeep on the screen. Then Brenda explained that Crystal had been traveling somewhere on her business and she didn't know about it. Brenda Delgado suggested that Jose not tell anyone anything and to simply repaint the Jeep. She was willing to pay to paint the Jeep. Jose was awaiting a decision on his U.S. citizenship and did not want any trouble with the police. He realized that Brenda had set him up. So Jose went to the police again and testified again. So the police tracked all the movements of the Jeep that day and found the two young women whose names Jose had given them. Brenda Delgado was the first person investigators called in for questioning. The woman told police that she never knew Kendra Hatcher and had never seen her before. When asked where she was on September 2nd at 07:42 p.m., Brenda stated her alibi because she was at Chili's restaurant with Jose. Brenda even provided receipts for the dinner. But how often, and more importantly, what do you keep dinner receipts for? So gradually, assembled in minute detail, the truth that the participants in the crime tried to hide was revealed. The central figure in the investigation was Brenda Delgado. She was born into a fairly simple family, Luis and Maria Delgado, who immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father was a factory worker. They found a home in a low-income neighborhood in southeast Dallas. It was then that Luis found a job in construction, and his wife worked at the U.S. Post Office cleaning houses. Brenda was their second child and their only girl. Not only was she an excellent student who was loved by her teachers, but she also worked part-time at a flower store and as a waitress. Brenda was very ambitious and dreamed of going to medical school someday. But the sad reality was that her parents couldn't afford the expensive tuition. So after graduating from Skyline High School in 2000, she continued to live with her parents, only dreaming of an affluent and beautiful life. On the way to her goal, Brenda worked hard. She was a dental assistant, and alongside that, she worked at a day spa in North Park Center where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, Brenda met Ricardo Paniagua and fell in love with him. Their first date was at a Jennifer Lopez concert and was like her dream date. In November 2012, 3 months after they met, Brenda moved in with Ricardo at his home in Fitzhugh Urban Flats. The man was also charmed by Brenda so much that he even met her parents. In 2013, she uploaded a post in honor of his birthday on Facebook where she wrote words of congratulations. "Happy birthday to the most amazing and smartest man I know. Ricky, together we have shared so much happiness. "You are my best friend. I love you with all my heart and can't imagine life without you." Brenda then found out she was pregnant, but at Ricardo's insistence, she terminated the pregnancy, which left her heartbroken. A little recovered from the decision, Brenda decides to devote herself to her career and her beloved Ricky. In the fall of the same year, she enrolled in Sanford. At first glance, it seemed that Brenda had gotten over the emotional blow of the breakup. However, this was not the case. Brenda's painful dependence on Ricardo only gained momentum. And when Ricky posted a joint photo on social media with his new lover Kendra, who looked like a photo model, Brenda was up to something terrible. Many who knew her testified that Brenda dreamed of getting rid of Kendra. After obtaining information about Brenda and her personal life, investigators were able to surmise that the offended woman had a motive to get rid of her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend. They dated intermittently from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky and Kendra met. Ricardo was confident that he and Brenda remained friends and saw no problems between Brenda and Kendra. After all, he had been on dates with other women before meeting Kendra. And why would it be meeting Kendra that would turn Brenda's mind? However, the picture of the reconstructed events confirmed how insidious and cruel an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado thought she had devised the perfect plan to win back her former lover and rid him of the superfluous figure, Kendra Hatcher. At first, she established communication with Ricardo, pretending to be his best friend, provided all kinds of support, was interested in how he and Kendra are progressing in their relationship. Secretly, she knew everything about their plans for the future, and Ricardo believed that this is a sincere interest. But it's a shame that men know women so poorly and sometimes blindly trust them. After Ricardo learned that Kendra had died, he shared his grief with Brenda via text message, and she supported her friend in every way possible and offered to do anything for him. Ricky had no way of guessing his ex's true motives. As it turned out, Brenda had been playing her own game for months. She had opened Ricardo's mail and knew about all his plans with Kendra, even where and when they had booked tickets. All of this was infuriating to Brenda. She longed to be rid of Kendra Hatcher, truly believing that she had taken her place. Brenda transferred Ricardo's account to her phone and kept tabs on him. Following Ricky and Kendra practically became her raison d'etre. Brenda became completely dependent on the stalking. She quit her job and devoted all her time to realizing her goals. Over time, a cruel and terrifying plan was born in Brenda's mind: to kill the hated Kendra and take her place beside her lover. For its realization, Brenda addressed to many of her acquaintances with an offer for money to harm Kendra Hatcher. Thus, through mutual acquaintances, she found a single mother 21-year-old Crystal Cortez, who, because of the big financial problems, just for $500 was ready to help her. At Brenda's behest, Crystal found the perpetrator, a man named Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Crystal handed Christopher $500 from Brenda, as well as 2 types of illegal substances. Several 2 women followed Kendra to learn her habits and daily schedule, to further select the location and time of the crime. On September 2, 2015, they took Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher Love waited for Kendra in the parking lot. They did not pursue her on her way home from work because they were afraid of falling behind her in traffic. In the evening, the criminals completed their devious plan and were rewarded for a job well done. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were apprehended. The suspects denied their guilt and their presence at the scene of the crime. However, the situation changed when Love was found to have the gun that killed Kendra in the side compartment of the car. Crystal, on the other hand, was nervous and constantly confused in her testimony, telling different stories about the reasons for the appearance of the SUV in different parts of the city. So, at the first interrogation, Crystal admitted that she was the woman who was driving in the parking lot, but she arrived there at the will of an armed carjacker who got into the SUV and forced her into the parking lot that evening. She, wishing to remain innocent, gave false testimony, saying that her son was in the car with her, but this information was later not confirmed because no child was recorded on the cameras. As the interrogation continued and more evidence became available, Crystal changed her testimony and wanted to make a deal with the investigation. She agreed to testify against Brenda in exchange for less time. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead and the crime was her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting with Brenda, they began planning the crime. The police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricardo was over. She was obsessed and desperate to win him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy to be his loyal friend, but her life began to fall apart. She began to resent Kendra, believing that she had taken her place. According to Crystal, it was at this point that Brenda decided that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. The perfect crime plan emerged in Brenda Delgado's mind. In testimony, Crystal detailed how Brenda devised the perfect crime. Enlisting each other's support, Brenda and Crystal began to formulate a plan to kill Kendra. They met many times and developed many plans. The original plan was to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then get rid of her. But to avoid being under suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around the scraggliest neighborhoods and asked a few people if they could help. That's how they met Christopher Love. He agreed to help and took an active part in deciding the modus operandi of the crime. The trio unanimously decided that the best way to kill was to shoot him because it was quick. While cooperating, Crystal revealed that the date of September 2nd was not chosen at random. Brenda knew that Kendra and Ricardo were planning a trip to Mexico, so it was decided to get rid of the woman before the happy vacation. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the crime to look like a botched robbery. Next, the criminals chose the location of the massacre. For days, they desperately tracked Kendra's movements and recorded her minute by minute to make sure nothing changed on the appointed day. After work, they traced her route home and figured out how to discreetly enter the apartment complex's secure parking garage. On September 1st, 2015, they made a final check. On the day of the crime, early in the morning, Brenda and Crystal picked up the Jeep from Jose, then picked up Christopher along the way. Brenda was dropped off at the library in Carrollton so she would have an alibi, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex. They waited across the street for about 30 minutes, then drove to Kendra's place of employment. After waiting for their victim, they followed her but lost her in traffic, however. They returned to the house first and waited there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves, approached Kendra with a gun, and shot her when she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she did not actually see the shooting but heard it. Crystal then drove Christopher home, picked up her son from his grandmother on the way, and later met Brenda at Jose's house where she handed him the Jeep. Thus, Brenda's dream came true. She was rid of her hated rival, and all she had to do was wait for her beloved Ricardo's message. Brenda was happy that she had managed to pull off the perfect crime. Crystal's candid confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about Brenda Delgado's guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. But when police officers arrived with the warrant, she was no longer at home. Having dual citizenship, Brenda Delgado fled to Mexico. After fleeing, Brenda's involvement in a contract killing became apparent, and she was put on a wanted list. On April 6, 2016, the FBI placed her on the list of most wanted fugitives, assigning a reward of $100,000 for information about her. So Brenda Delgado became the only woman on the list at the time and the 9th woman on the list ever. But just 2 days later, in Torreon, Coahuila, she was apprehended by Mexican authorities and extradited to the United States on October 6th. Mexico agreed to extradite Brenda, but only on the grounds that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Brenda was extradited to Texas, and she was brought to trial. Hearings in the case began in 2017. The grief-stricken relatives of Kendra and Ricardo did not hesitate to express themselves during the court appearance. The oil was added to the fire by witnesses who confirmed Brenda's intentions and her dangerous obsession with her former lover. Brenda's cousin, Moses Martinez, spoke in court about his sister's depression after the end of her and Ricky's relationship. He also revealed that Brenda offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He refused to do so. Brenda's friend, Jennifer Escobar, testified at trial that Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo and read all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer revealed that Brenda had asked her to help eliminate the hated Kendra Hatcher too. She also told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something lethal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. For her help, Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car, and illegal drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then refused. It is quite strange that adults, having been offered the suggestion to harm or kill someone, contemplated doing so, and none of them went to the police to report a threat to a person's life or health. The court heard evidence about obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. So the court found that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, and she wanted only one thing: to get back to Ricky. The court received corroboration that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda became increasingly obsessed. As evidence of Brenda's involvement, an ATM withdrawal receipt in the amount of $500, which she subsequently gave to Crystal for doing the work, was presented at the hearing. Christopher Love received a cash payment in the amount of $600. The cell phone data provided also indicated that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together prior to the crime. More than 99 calls were recorded between Brenda and Crystal between August 22 and September 4th, proving their constant communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. The defendant's attorney tried to shift much of the blame to the perpetrators, but it didn't work. The defense argued that Brenda was not at the scene of the crime. She had an alibi and receipts confirming her presence at the restaurant at the time of the crime. Brenda herself did not plead guilty, but the jury thought otherwise. It took them only 30 minutes to find Brenda Delgado guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Christopher Love, the direct perpetrator of the crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death via injection. Crystal Cortez, in exchange for cooperating with the investigation and pleading guilty, received a sentence of 35 years in prison with parole eligibility. The family of Kendra Hatcher was satisfied with the court's decision and silently withdrew from the courtroom after the verdict. The Delgado family did not believe to the last that their Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving daughter and woman, healthy and with good family and Christian values. I hope this cautionary tale of female perfidy and mentally unhealthy obsessive love will leave a mark on every woman's soul and serve as a cautionary tale in new love relationships, for no man is worth a human life. Take care of yourself and be careful. A paradise beach turned into a death trap for lovers. It is believed that an investigation on the heels of a crime is the most effective and often leads to success. The methodology itself implies immediate response, operational collection of evidence, and questioning of witnesses, which significantly increases the chances of quickly solving the case and holding the guilty accountable. However, if it is not possible to identify the perpetrator, the investigation can drag on for years and even decades until the criminal case is frozen and transferred to the archive after the statute of limitations expires. However, sometimes unsolved and seemingly hopeless investigations receive unexpected developments many years later, which helps to find the right lead and achieve results when no one believed it anymore. The case of Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, which had been gathering dust on the shelves for almost 15 years, is a prime example of this. At the time, it was not possible to solve it despite the operational actions of the investigative team and the high reward offered for any information. The main problem was the lack of motive for such a brutal act against the loving couple. In addition to this, it was not possible to find any witnesses, murder weapons, or any significant clues. It was a typical dead end, and no one hoped that the truth would ever be discovered. However, a decade and a half later, solving this case was helped by another brutal crime. It also turned out that at least 4 people knew what had happened, but all these years, they remained silent. Who were Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen? Lindsay Cutshall was born in the small town of White Eyes in Coshocton County, Ohio, in 1982. She grew up in a very religious family, and her father was a pastor of a Christian community. Despite a strict upbringing from childhood, she was very active, engaged in sports, and later became interested in hiking and extreme tourism. After finishing school, Lindsay became a student at Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia. During those years, she regularly climbed mountains of various difficulty levels, rafted down turbulent mountain rivers, and even organized hikes herself. The young woman dreamed of founding her own summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them the basics of survival in the wild, rafting, tourism, and so on. Jason Allen was born in the city of Zeeland, in the American state of Michigan, in 1978. He also grew up in a deeply religious family, and from a teenage age was seriously interested in hiking tours, mastering survival in the wild. The young man was tall, athletic, toned, possessed leadership qualities, and was able to find like-minded people to conquer new heights. The couple met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachians. At that time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. The young people immediately felt mutual sympathy, and just 6 months after their first meeting, the young man came to the girl's parents and asked for their daughter's hand in marriage. Her parents were not opposed and gave their blessing to the lovers. The young man's parents also approved of his choice, after which the couple was officially engaged. Allen presented the young woman with a beautiful diamond ring for this occasion, which was soon to be complemented by another, an engagement ring. The young couple planned to get married in September 2004, had big plans for their future together, and wanted to buy their own large house where they could live comfortably and raise their children. Unfortunately, these plans were not meant to come true. The final trip. In the summer of 2004, Lindsay and Jason worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock and Water, located in El Dorado County, California. After their wedding, they planned to open their own similar camp, so they were gaining experience and learning the nuances of working with the younger generation. On the evening of Friday, August 14th of that year, the couple decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. They informed their colleagues of their plans in advance, leaving 2 of the most experienced counselors in charge of the camp. Lindsay and Jason promised to return by Monday, so their short journey was expected to cause no complications either for the couple or for their temporary replacements. They set off in a 1992 red Ford Tempo. owned by Lindsay, and that was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, the counselors had not returned to the camp, but no alarm was raised then, as everyone was confident that the couple would arrive either late at night or early Monday morning. However, when it was discovered after the morning roll call at 8 a.m. that Jason and Lindsay were still missing and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues decided to contact the police and also informed the missing couple's families about the situation. The parents, horrified upon hearing the news, rushed to the camp to learn more about the incident. Everyone knew that the couple was very responsible in their duties. They were never late, and if any unforeseen circumstances had occurred, they would have found a way to communicate that. The challenging search. Upon arrival at the camp, law enforcement officials interviewed the couple's colleagues, and the investigation immediately encountered a serious problem. No one could precisely say where the young couple had gone. It was only known that they planned to explore around San Francisco, and given their great love for adventure and extreme leisure, they could be in the most remote corners where there was neither communication nor civilization. While the police waited the legally mandated 2 days during which the missing were expected to report themselves, relatives and friends decided not to just sit back, but to organize a search themselves. They called everyone they knew, trying to find out when the couple last made contact with anyone, distributed flyers with photos of the bride and groom, and requested anyone who might have seen them to respond immediately. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search operation. The main search unfolded around San Francisco, its suburbs and surroundings. However, the area was vast, and it was simply not possible to thoroughly comb through it. Then, one of the friends noted that the couple loved the wild, rocky beaches that were always beautiful and secluded, prompting the police to focus on these areas. Bodies in sleeping bags. For several days, the search yielded no results, and the hope of finding the couple alive was diminishing rapidly. Then, on Wednesday, August 19th, a patrol helicopter flying over one of the rocky, wild beaches reported that 2 bodies were found in sleeping bags on the desolate coast, and it seemed unlikely they were just resting there. The first thing police encountered upon arriving at the scene was a red Ford Tempo parked on a cliff near a lookout point in a small shelter for tourists, from which a steep trail led directly to the scenic, wild beach. The car was immediately checked in the database and found to belong to the missing student, Lindsay Cutshall. Descending the trail to the beach, law enforcement found 2 bright sleeping bags containing individuals. At first, it might have seemed they were merely sleeping, but no response came to calls or noise. Approaching closer, the officers saw that the sleeping bags contained a young man and woman, both showing no signs of life. A brief initial examination suggested that their lives had been taken by gunshot wounds to the head, and given the distinctive smell of decomposition, they had been there for more than a day. All the belongings of the deceased, including mobile phones and wallets containing bank cards and cash, were found beside them. Therefore, a robbery as the main motive was almost immediately ruled out. The keys to the parked car above were also visibly placed, ruling out car theft as a motive. Investigators immediately suspected that the deceased were the same young people who had gone missing last week near San Francisco. Their suspicion was confirmed by documents found nearby under the names Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, but the bodies still needed to be identified by relatives. The arriving parents of the couple, who had hoped until the last that the remains belonged to someone else, were devastated by grief upon recognizing their children. Investigation and initial theories. Thus, theories involving robbery or an attempted carjacking were dismissed since all valuables, money, and keys were left untouched in plain sight. Moreover, forensic analysis revealed no signs of physical assault or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were simply sleeping peacefully at the time of the incident and did not have a chance to react. They made no attempt to defend themselves, flee, or even get out of their sleeping bags. Everything pointed to a swift act that resembled an execution or vendetta. But who could have taken the lives of 2 individuals in such a brutal manner, and why? The questions multiplied, but no answers were forthcoming. There were no signs that anyone else had stayed in the area. The beach was quite secluded, and accessing it via the steep trail was challenging. Despite efforts, no shell casings were found nearby, leading investigators to theorize that the shooter either took them or threw them into the ocean. The shots had been fired at close range into the heads of the sleeping tourists, indicated by specific traces, so the casings, if not deliberately moved, would have been nearby. Interestingly, the beach appeared quite clean, yet a few meters from where the sleeping bags with the bodies were found, an empty beer bottle lay. The deceased did not drink alcohol as they led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting the bottle might belong to the mysterious shooter. This particular brand of beer was rarely found in the area and likely came from a neighboring state. As no other clues were found, this bottle was considered a significant lead, although it was unclear whether it had any connection to the shooter or the crime. A theory was proposed that the deceased might have had a conflict with someone the day before the tragedy, and their opponent returned at night with a weapon to settle the score. Although Jason and Lindsay were very friendly with everyone, it was not excluded that they might have inadvertently displeased someone either in appearance or for some other reason. Additionally, the shooter could have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. From the bullets extracted from the victims' skulls, experts determined they were fired from a Marlin brand rifle, .45 caliber, model 1894, produced by Marlin Firearms Company. This was a rare weapon that might have been part of a collector's arsenal. Such models were typically used for hunting. This clue was significant for the ongoing investigation, but it remained the only one for the time being. Investigators speculated that the shooter was likely a male acting alone. He could have been a hunter, collector, or firearm enthusiast. The couple's route, search, and witness interviews. The investigation now aimed to establish the route the couple had taken, who they might have contacted, and when they were last seen alive. The first task presented few issues, as the couple had taken numerous photos, and their camera remained untouched among their personal belongings. Additionally, in the tourist cabin near the lookout point where they parked their car, there was a guest book where visitors could leave notes. The engaged couple had written a couple of entries expressing that it was one of the best weekends of their lives, filled with love, happiness, and the discovery of perhaps the most beautiful beach they had ever seen. It was discovered that on Saturday the couple had stopped at a fishing pier about 20 miles from where their lives were ultimately taken. This was evidenced by the photographs they had taken there, prompting law enforcement to visit the area and speak with locals in search of potential witnesses. Many remembered the young couple traveling in a red car. They were looking for a place to stay overnight, but found no vacancies in any of the 3 nearby hotels. This was because August is peak tourist season in the area, and most travelers book their accommodations well in advance. The couple then dined at a local restaurant, walked around the area, took several photos, and set off again in the evening. According to everyone who saw and interacted with them, they were friendly, engaged in no conflicts, and appeared happy and carefree. None of the witnesses could recall anything suspicious or unusual. Notably, the beach where the bodies were found was located in a protected area where camping was prohibited. However, since the young people could not find a place to stay overnight, they decided to settle on the beach, but chose not to set up a tent, instead using their sleeping bags. They believed that on a warm August night on a secluded beach, they faced no threats, and planned to head back at dawn to return to the Rock and Water camp on Sunday as promised. This information helped narrow down the time frame during which the couple was likely taken from life. They went to sleep but did not survive until morning, indicating they were likely taken from life between 11 o'clock Saturday night and dawn on Sunday. The first suspect. Although the investigation into the double taking of life was in full swing and news broadcasts urged anyone with any relevant information to contact the police, law enforcement withheld certain details. In particular, the results of the ballistics analysis were kept secret to avoid alerting the suspect and prompting them to hastily dispose of the weapon used in the crime. Initially, suspicion fell on a local drifter who periodically slept on that very beach and had been seen nearby on the evening before the crime. The homeless man, mentioned by some witnesses, was quickly located, brought to the station, and interrogated. The 57-year-old suspect had no alibi for the night of the crime. However, his involvement could not be confirmed. The main reasons were the absence of the weapon used in the crime and the fact that his DNA did not match that found on the beer bottle discovered on the beach. A new phase of the investigation in 2006. For nearly 2 years, the investigation had been at a standstill with no clear direction on how to proceed. Then, in the spring of 2006, law enforcement decided to publicize the data they had on the weapon used in the crime and to reach out again to potential witnesses by offering a $50,000 reward for any useful information that could lead to the perpetrator. Following this announcement, about 1,000 calls came in, but most did not aid the advancement of the investigation. However, law enforcement became interested in 26-year-old Sean Gallen, pointed out by several locals. According to them, the young man collected firearms and bladed weapons, behaved aggressively, was frequently involved in conflicts, threatened acts of violence, and occasionally damaged other people's property. Sean was arrested and questioned. He had previously been on the police's radar for brawling, hooliganism, and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He indeed had an impressive collection of weapons, but the specific rifle in question was not among them. Verifying his alibi from 2 years prior proved impossible, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, so Gallen had to be released. A suspect from another country? Simultaneously, another suspicious and aggressive drifter came under scrutiny, often seen with a firearm, frightening the local residents. His name was Joseph Henry Burgess, and he was 61 years old at the time of the couple's demise. Burgess often ranted about receiving commands from God. It was discovered that in the late 1970s, Joseph lived in Canada, where he also wandered aimlessly. In 1978, he joined the Commune of the Children of God, positioning himself as a deeply religious person, and according to those around him, he was quite the fanatic. He soon had a conflict with 2 young people that escalated into outright enmity, and a few weeks later, these individuals were found lifeless, each with several close-range gunshot wounds to the head. Notably, their bodies were also discovered on a beach in sleeping bags, seemingly taken while they slept. By the time the police arrived, Burgess had vanished. His guilt was proven through numerous left-behind clues, but he could not be convicted as he had fled to the USA, crossing the border illegally. He managed to evade capture for nearly a quarter of a century until the police connected him with the double homicide on a beach in California. However, they were unable to interrogate him as a shootout occurred during his apprehension, resulting in the deaths of a police sergeant and Burgess himself who opened fire. A fatal echo from the past. In the spring of 2017 in Forestville, California, a tragedy unfolded one night on March 14th. Gunshots rang out in the Gallen family home, prompting alarmed neighbors to immediately call the police. The victim was 35-year-old Seamus Gowan, and the perpetrator was his older brother, Sean. An argument had erupted between the siblings, during which Sean, under the influence of prohibited substances, grabbed a firearm and discharged 3 bullets into his younger brother. Police recognized the shooter's name as Sean had previously been detained as a suspect in a double homicide on a beach, but was released due to a lack of evidence. Since then, he had been in police sites twice for property damage and making threats, but had only received fines. It was also discovered that the detainee was an avid hunter and had a hobby of crafting knives and other bladed weapons. Those around him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After taking his brother's life, Sean attempted to flee but was almost immediately apprehended. Law enforcement then decided to thoroughly reinvestigate this man's potential involvement in a couple's perpetration from 13 years prior. His personal social media page revealed much, where he posted pictures of his substantial weapon collection and discussed supposed telepathic and extrasensory abilities. According to his posts, he believed he was on a special mission, receiving assignments from space. This seemed like delusions of a disturbed mind, and police suspected Sean indeed had serious mental disorders. He stubbornly refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke nonsensically, and insisted on his innocence. However, when detectives checked the personal messages on his deceased brother's page, they found something intriguing. Back in 2006, when a $50,000 reward was offered for information on the double homicide case, Sean's former girlfriend had messaged Seamus, suggesting she could claim the reward by turning in her ex-boyfriend. They both knew everything but kept silent. Unfortunately, questioning either was no longer possible since the brother had been shot, and the woman had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. An unexpected confession. Initially, Sean denied any involvement and refused to speak, but when shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he surprisingly confessed and began to give a detailed account. His narrative not only surprised, but shocked law enforcement. Despite more than 13 years passing since the double homicide, Gallon remembered the details of that night vividly. That evening, he had left his house with a Marlin rifle, intending to hunt in a wooded area. He aimlessly wandered for a couple of hours before descending a trail to a wild beach, which, he claimed, was a spot to encounter boars. As he walked along the shore, he spotted 2 bright sleeping bags. Approaching closer, he discovered a young man and woman sound asleep inside. He stood watching them for several minutes, then suddenly heard voices in his head commanding him to end their lives. Sean claimed this was the mission from space he could not ignore. He placed the barrel of his rifle almost against the young man's head and pulled the trigger. The sound woke the young woman, but before she could comprehend the situation, a second shot ended her life as well. He decided to collect the casings and carried them away in a beer can he had emptied while descending to the beach. Later, according to him, he tossed the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he went to give the rifle to his father and asked him to hide it. His elderly father asked no questions and simply buried the weapon in the dirt floor of the cellar in his old barn. Remarkably, Sean's claims were verified. The rifle was found at the site of the now collapsed barn, and the beer can with the casing still rested in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The fact that the murderer's father had passed away in 2009 and his property had since fallen into disrepair and abandonment helped preserve these items. It turned out that the bottle found on the beach had no connection to the crime and was mistakenly considered as evidence. Forensic psychiatric evaluation, Sean Gallon blamed the voices in his head, which he claimed ordered him to commit acts of violence, and asserted that he was not aware of his actions. His defense attorneys also insisted that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. It was up to qualified psychiatrists to determine the truth of these claims. The evaluation revealed that the accused did indeed suffer from a range of mental disorders, exacerbated by the effects of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, at the time of the crime, he acted deliberately, carefully planning each step. Sean was fully aware of how to proceed and how to cover his tracks to avoid police detection. This was precisely why he first ended the life of the young man, knowing that if anything went awry, the woman would not be able to resist. For the same reason, he took the casings with him and prudently gave the rifle to his father, asking him to hide it. According to the psychiatrists, although Gallon had mental deviations, he was competent to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. What was surprising in this complex case was that his parents, brother, and former girlfriend knew, or at least suspected, that he had committed the double homicide, yet none of them had turned him over to the police. Trial and sentence. The trial of the accused took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the brutal act against the couple. On June 17th of that year, Sean Gallon was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 94 years for the end of his own brother's life in 2017. The convicted man is now serving his sentence in a special prison unit designated for particularly dangerous inmates with mental disorders. He continues to claim that he hears voices and behaves aggressively, hence he is kept under special surveillance to prevent him from harming himself or anyone else nearby. Lastly, it should be noted that the motive for the double homicide was never established. Sean simply saw the couple sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives. Sometimes the search for paradise on Earth can lead one straight into a real-life hell from which escape is impossible. However, it's only fair to note that a significant factor in this journey is who accompanies you in search of this paradise. Choosing a companion should always be done with the utmost care and caution, yet sometimes Even the person who seems closest and dearest can turn into a true, merciless monster. The tale of Yvonne Baldelli and Brian Brimiger began like something out of a fairy tale. Yvonne thought she had found true love, for which she was ready to run to the ends of the earth. However, from the very beginning, her relationship raised concerns among Yvonne's family, who disapproved of her partner. Unfortunately, the family's worries were not unfounded. This complex case started in 2011, when a happy and in-love Yvonne left with her beloved for a tropical island. As it turned out, she was heading straight towards her own demise. Only several years later, disfigured fragments of her body were discovered in a swamp, bagged alongside the remains of her cherished pets. Yvonne's family exerted considerable effort to achieve justice, efforts that cost another family member their life. Who was Yvonne Baldelli? Yvonne Olivia Baldelli, née Fold, was born on June 30th, 1969, in a small town in the southern part of sunny California. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold, growing up alongside her older brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she shared a particularly close bond from childhood. When Yvonne was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried to Lillian Faust, and the grown children developed wonderful relationships with their stepmother, a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Yvonne received a solid education and explored several career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She was married twice, but both marriages ended in separation. Additionally, a surgery she underwent in her youth, followed by complications, left Yvonne unable to have children. After divorcing her second husband, Kevin Baldelli, in 2007, Yvonne lived alone in her small apartment with her beloved dog, whom she affectionately called her child. She remained in constant contact with her father and sister, calling them almost daily and making an effort to see her family at least once a month. Meeting Brian and the love triangle. In 2009, as Yvonne was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimiger. At that time, he was legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open to having an affair and shared with his mistress how unhappy he was in his marriage, claiming he hadn't filed for divorce solely because of his child, whom he didn't want to distress. Baldelli fell for this fit and handsome man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself, and knowing how hard it can be to leave such a relationship, she didn't rush her partner, believing that the presence of a child was indeed the main obstacle. However, Brian wasn't as straightforward and sincere as he appeared. From a young age, his attractive looks had made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was accustomed to juggling multiple relationships simultaneously and expertly deceived the women who fell for him, promising each one marriage, a family, and eternal love. It soon came to light that the married Brimiger was not only seeing Yvonne, but also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a stunning blonde with extensive connections. She was an analyst at the White House and had made a remarkable career during George W. Bush Jr.'s administration. When Yvonne discovered the existence of another rival, she decided to confront the issue head-on and was ready to fight for the man she loved. Gathering her courage, she called her lover's wife to inform her that Brian was cheating on her with not just one, but two women. This revelation sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult choice. Eventually, he chose Yvonne, though it's possible she pressured him into making this decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with his new love interest. At that time, he was still serving in the Marines, but had been contemplating ending his military career for a while. The couple seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's relatives remained wary of her new partner, doubting the sincerity of his feelings. Moving to a tropical paradise. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to talk about radically changing his life. leaving the service, moving away from the bustling city, and settling down on a tropical island. Ivan shared his sentiments, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever and whenever he decided. She believed she had met the most important man in her life and adored him. By September of the same year, the decision was final. The couple chose to move to Panama and settle on the small island of Carnero, a place that could truly be called a paradise. Ivan informed her family just before leaving, so they had no chance to persuade her to reconsider. Ivan sold her apartment, quit her job, and started packing for the journey. She took only a few bikinis, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, hoping to fulfill her dream of opening a small boutique to create and sell custom outfits to tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Yvonne, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a couple of days in the country's capital before taking a ferry to Carnero Island, where they rented a house right on the ocean front. The climate was hot and humid with little temperature variation, attracting a steady flow of tourists throughout the year, primarily diving and surfing enthusiasts. The island was just 1 square kilometer, so one could leisurely walk around it in about an hour. All the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior was dense jungle and swampy areas teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it unsafe to venture into. Brian, who had been an excellent guitar player since his youth, brought his instrument with the intention of starting a musical career on the island, performing in entertainment venues. Within a week after moving, he had made connections with several local bar owners, and one of them happily offered him a job. He played in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his appreciative audience often bought him drinks as a compliment, leading him to drink heavily almost daily. Yvonne's business also developed very slowly, with weak sales and virtually no profit. However, she didn't lose heart. She started working at one of the bars and even adopted a second dog she found on the island and decided to keep. She communicated with her sister Michelle Valenzuela almost daily, sharing everything, but her messages became increasingly shorter and more somber, which worried her family. The first few months on the island seemed like paradise to the couple. Yvonne hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic wedding ceremony on the ocean shore. But time passed. Brian didn't rush into marriage, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. The mysterious disappearance. In early December, Michelle stopped receiving messages from Yvonne, which raised her concerns significantly. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle, inquiring when he could stop by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her garage before heading to Panama. This call and question caught Michelle off guard. It meant Brian had returned to the U.S. and wanted to retrieve his vehicle. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even called? In response, Brian claimed he had explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also mentioned that his now ex-girlfriend had supposedly sent her a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing, so she turned to her email. Indeed, there were 2 unread messages, one from her sister and one from her boyfriend. In his message, Brian stated that Yvonne had left him, running off with a new lover to Costa Rica. The other message, supposedly from Yvonne, claimed she had left Brian upon discovering his infidelity and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. It concluded with her saying she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine Verhoeven, with whom he had been involved all along, and who was pregnant with his child when he and Yvonne flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed plausible and logical, especially since Yvonne couldn't have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else could have been devastating for her. However, Yvonne wasn't known for impulsive actions, and she would have certainly called her sister to discuss such significant changes in her life. Moreover, the tone of the supposed message from Yvonne was somewhat odd and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle tried to determine her sister's current whereabouts, she couldn't get any concrete information. Calls went unanswered, and the messages that came through were brief and detached, saying things like, "I'm okay. I need some time. I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian should join her in filing a missing persons report. Brian appeared nervous but insisted it wasn't necessary, claiming Yvonne was fine, capable of taking care of herself, and would decide when to come home on her own. Despite Brian's reluctance even to discuss the matter, and his hasty departure after picking up his vehicle, a message from Yvonne's phone soon arrived, stating she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message provided Michelle with some relief, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping Yvonne would return as indicated in the message. Search efforts and surprising discoveries. By mid-January, not only had Yvonne not returned home, but she also hadn't called even once during that time, and her messages had completely stopped. Moreover, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had gotten married to the mother of his child, Christine Verhoeven, right before the new year, which seemed very odd since he had parted ways with his former girlfriend just a few weeks before the celebration. Concerned, Michelle finally went to the police and reported her sister missing, suspecting that Yvonne had not gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry sent to Panama confirmed her fears. It was definitively established that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Valenzuela then turned to her cousin, a programmer, to help trace the IP address from which Yvonne's messages were sent, determining their actual origin. It turned out the emails, supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December, were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. With the situation becoming increasingly alarming, Michelle hurriedly informed the police about her discovery. Valenzuela reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and then continued to send messages from her phone and email, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue gathering proof of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Yvonne. He promised Verhoeven that he would soon return, they would get married, and raise their daughter together. Moreover, Christine was unaware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's own investigation. 2 months after the woman's disappearance, her sister and niece personally flew to Panama. There, they sought the expertise of Don Winner, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator specializing in locating missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events provided by Brian. Winner, after listening to them, immediately expressed concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were slim. With vast experience in such investigations and leveraging his connections, Winner decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was also organized with the participation of Yvonne's family members. Later, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends arrived in Panama to join the search and assist the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Caranero, combing it thoroughly, yet they found no trace of Baldelli. Their search efforts were hampered by dense undergrowth and swampy marshes teeming with wildlife. In addition, the family questioned the island's residents about how well they knew Brian and Yvonne and what they could say about them. It turned out that the couple had recently been heavily indulging in alcoholic beverages and were frequently involved in loud disputes, unconcerned about those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars drinking alcohol and having heated arguments. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body. She almost never took off her sunglasses, seemingly to hide the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house the couple had rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residence. Simultaneously, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to scour the waters around it for any potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches too did not yield any success. The prime suspect and the first solid evidence. From the outset, Brian was the prime suspect in the case, but there was nothing concrete to charge him with. He denied any involvement, consistently recounting the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It wasn't until September 21st, 2012, that Brimmager was finally interrogated, and a search was conducted in his home. At the time, his wife Christine was at work, while Brian was unemployed, staying at home with their child and indulging in his favorite pastime, playing golf. Initially, he appeared confident, repeating that Yvonne had left him after finding out about his child with another woman. However, he became visibly nervous when the police mentioned that the last messages sent in Yvonne's name came from his area and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his table. The seized laptop turned out to belong to Yvonne, with messages sent from it after she supposedly fled. A photo of the missing woman with a bruise under her eye was found on the computer, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November, where Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and shared daughter, presumably how Baldelli learned about them. Moreover, the laptop's search history from November 26, 2011, contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, since neither a body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Yvonne didn't definitively prove him guilty. Soon, Don Winter discovered that before leaving Panama, Brimmager had sold a machete he owned. In an online conversation with a potential buyer, he joked that he had used the weapon just once to finish off a stripper. The joke was macabre, prompting authorities to track down the new owner of the machete and seize the blade for examination, which initially revealed nothing conclusive. The long-awaited arrest. The police overlooked another crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance. To add credibility to his story, before returning to the States, he decided to make a trip to Costa Rica and use the missing woman's card a couple of times, creating the illusion that she had indeed fled to that country. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, draining the card before discarding it. However, Brimmager failed to consider that he was captured on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. It wasn't until July 2013, a year and a half after the woman's disappearance, that her relatives, armed with all the evidence gathered by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally managed to secure Brian's arrest. Initially, he was detained on charges of making false statements and obstructing the investigation, as there was nothing more substantial to charge him with at that time. By then, he had become a father for the second time. Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to engage the suspect in a candid conversation, offering him a chance to confess to the crime and disclose the location of the body, but Brian consistently denied any wrongdoing. His lawyer also insisted on the absence of a body or direct evidence, proving Yvonne's demise and Brian's involvement in it. The gruesome discovery in the swamp. Just 2 months after Brimmager's arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. On the island of Carnero, a worker taking a shortcut wandered into the swampy underbrush and spotted an army backpack barely visible above the water's surface. Driven by curiosity and hoping to find something valuable or useful inside, he looked in the bag, only to recoil in horror at the sight of a human skull staring back at him. He immediately reported his find to the police, and responding officers took the backpack for examination. Inside were fragments of a human body, along with the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been chopped up, placed in the bag, and discarded in a location where it was assumed they would never be found. DNA testing confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne, although limbs were missing. Pathologists also determined that she had been brutally beaten before her demise, with a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The demise of the dogs was probably orchestrated to lend credence to the narrative, as it seemed implausible that she would willingly leave behind her cherished pets on the island, suggesting a scenario where they were eliminated and laid to rest alongside their owner. When the chop marks found on the victim's bones were matched with the blade of the machete, there was no doubt. The body had been dismembered using this weapon, as each blade has its own signature, akin to a person's fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. The trial and verdict. In early 2014, Michelle Valenzuela was diagnosed with an advanced stage of aggressive cancer. She had been so consumed by the investigation into her sister's case that she neglected her deteriorating health, postponing visits to the doctor. After undergoing intensive treatment for about 6 months and realizing it was in vain, she decided to dedicate the last months of her life to seeking justice for her sister. In September 2014, when doctors told Michelle she had only a few weeks left, she declared that although she was losing her battle with the disease, she would continue to fight for her sister until her last breath. Choosing to make her testimony in front of Brian, she detailed everything she knew and submitted all their correspondence with Yvonne to the court. She meticulously described Brian's actions after her sister's disappearance and then fainted from weakness. Michelle passed away 3 days later. The prosecution argued that on the evening of November 26th, following another argument with Yvonne, when she discovered Brian's communications with Christine, Brian, in a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, assaulted Yvonne and then fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using a machete, also using it to take the live Yvonne's beloved dogs, and placed the remains in his military backpack. The limbs that didn't fit in the bag were dumped in the ocean, dropped off a rocky cliff early in the morning along with the blood-stained mattress. Brian carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the next few weeks, he continued living in the same coastal house, meticulously erasing any evidence of the crime. He told everyone on the island a story about his flighty girlfriend leaving him for a new lover, a story that sounded convincing enough that locals sympathized with Brian. And he even managed to find a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until his departure to the U.S. However, at the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of lying and cruelty. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Brian was forced to admit his guilt, but insisted that it was self-defense, claiming Yvonne had first attacked him with a knife, which he then used against her. He claimed all subsequent actions were carried out in the state of shock, asserting he didn't remember dismembering and packing the body, taking the lives of the dogs, and so forth. However, his internet searches and attempts to eliminate evidence spoke to his full awareness, and attempts to fabricate a story to justify Yvonne's absence. In the spring of 2016, Brian was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to only 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2035. His service in the Marines was considered during sentencing, allowing him to avoid a life sentence. Lastly, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, stated she still believed in her husband's innocence and would support him no matter what.